Hi, this is Ross Bentley.
Hi, this is Jeff Braun.
And this is
And this
No Dumb Question.
Questions.
Yeah, no dumb question. Actually, I think that was the dumbest intro yet.
That was terrible.
Yeah.
That was terrible.
We suck.
I did see a little, there's a little glitch though. One of these days, do it in person and we'll nail it perfectly.
Yeah.
But
I'm going to blame technology.
Then there won't be anything. Right. There won't be anything for anybody to criticize after that. So we'll put that on the back burner.
I'm pretty sure they'll find something to criticize because I think there's lots to criticize when we're doing these things. So
what?
Yeah.
I thought we were perfect.
Well,
seems like we're perfect.
Depending on your definition of perfection, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. In our own minds.
Yeah. Hey, so these have been fun to do. Yeah, these have been fun to do. And so the first question is from Chris Ludwig. And he says, my stupid question is, which I don't think we allowed stupid questions, only dumb questions. And this one's not one of them. But anyways, he says, my stupid question is, when, if ever, is crossweight appropriate on a road race car to favor turning in one direction over the other? Other than experimenting and seeing what the stopwatch says, is there data that points to a likely use of crossweight? Interesting.
Yeah, that's a really good question. And something that probably a lot of road racers miss. Oval racers obviously use that quite a bit. They, back in the NASCAR days, they still, even today with all the technology, they still call it wedge. And wedge is just a cross weight change and when we talk about cross weight, if you were to put the car on a set of scales and weigh each of the corners, and then you took the weight of one diagonal, let's say the right front and left rear, added those up, took the weight of the other diagonal, right rear, left front, added those up. And if those cross weights weighed the same, you would have no cross weight.
Right.
If you had one diagonal weighing more than the other, that would be cross weight. And a lot of people do it as a percentage of the total weight. So with no cross weight, you have 50% of the weight on each diagonal. With cross weight, you might have 55% on one diagonal and 45 on the other. So that's how you measure it.
So on an oval, Jeff, what would that be?
Man, it can be depending on your setup. On an oval, it can be more weight on the left front diagonal or more weight on the right front diagonal, depending on what your spring, bar, shock combination is. Normally, what you want to do is normally what they would do is make the left front right rear diagonal way more because that helps it turn better. And you can think about how that works. If you put more weight on the left, if you're going on an oval now, we're talking about it, and you put more weight on the left front, that tire generally can make more grip, right? Because you're not normally you're rolling into the corner, the left front becomes lighter, but now you're putting more weight in there. So it's going to gain grip in general terms. But on ovals, you'll change your spring rates different for each corner. You'll have stagger. You'll have different shock valving from side to side. You'll have tilt in the car, which is the ride height lower on the left side. So sometimes you have the car so free, so loose, that you actually need to take the cross weight out of it and make the right front heavier. So it depends. It depends on the oval track setup. And it depends whether you're running an Indy car or a NASCAR car or a late model. I mean, some late models stock cars I've run had 65% of the weight of the car on the left-hand side because you moved everything over, all the batteries and the fuel tank and the driver sat way to the left. And And so then the car turns really good. So sometimes you need what would be opposite cross weight. So I guess the big thing to remember is, in general, especially in road racing, let's get back to road racing because that's what the question was about.
Yep.
If you want to make your car turn better, you have understeer. You need to add cross weight to the inside tire of the corner you want to make it turn better. So a great example in road racing is Lime Rock. Lime Rock is a right-hand oval, except one corner, basically. Yeah. And they have the little chicane if you use the little chicane, but really it's a right-hand oval. So for years and years and years, I and most race engineers, when we went to Lime Rock, you would run more weight on the right front than on the left front. Normally in road racing, you set up the corner weights so that your fronts are equal, so that when you put on the brakes, one tire is not lighter and it doesn't lock up easier than the other. That's kind of the normal situation. At Lime Rock, we would run 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50 pounds heavier on the right front so that it would turn better, because you have turn one, long corner. You have the big corner at the back of the track, long corner. You have the last corner, long corner. And you want to get that weight in the right front to help it turn. And it's very, very effective. It definitely makes the car understeer less in those corners. And that's typically what you find at those long corners. Another great example, or I've used it with success, is Watkins Glen. After the bus stop, that big long turn 5. And think about, turn 1, the S's. There are some left-hand corners, but a lot of the important ones, turn 7, turn 8, are right-hand corners. So some right front weight can help. Road Atlanta can help. There's not, most of the corners are right-hand corners at Road Atlanta. So yeah, we use it all the time. It's not unheard of. It's not weird. It's it can make you quicker. There's some downsides. You get too carried away and suddenly you put the brakes on and the light tire locks before the heavy tire.
Yeah.
So there's some limiting factors. And then you can't ignore the corners that go the other way. It's definitely going to be, if you make it turn really good at Lime Rock on all the right-hand corners and you go into that left-hand corner, it's the corner weight is the wrong way. It's probably going to understeer more than you really want it to do. So, there's limiting factors. How much is, I would say on a road race car, I've never seen more than 55% on one diagonal. It's not to say it can't be more than that, but that's kind of a, and I would say if you're not 52-ish, you're probably not going to feel much. Some cars you can't, some cars it's hard to adjust that. I'm talking about cars with spring perches, coilover shocks and spring perches or push rods where you can adjust that weight, cross weight easily. But there's also, if you have a car that has coil springs and even like a strut car, you can put spacers, like a big spacer the size of your spring, underneath that spring, between the spring perch and the spring itself. And that will make that corner carry more of the load of the car. So if you had like a little 1/4-inch spacer, you could throw it in there, have to be split, throw it in there, and add some weight to that corner of the car.
So if you get a solid rear axle car,
you could still do the same thing if you spaced up, if you have coil springs on a solid rear axle, you could still put a spacer under one of those springs.
Right.
But normally, and you can do it at the rear too. That's a common way. or you can do a little of both. You could do, if you're going to Lime Rock and you want some right front cross weight, you could raise the right front spring and the left rear spring. So you can do both too.
Right.
It doesn't all have to be on one corner. It just depends, if you're in an aero high, if you're in a prototype, you got to watch your ride heights because you don't want to screw up your aero splitter heights and things like that. So you don't want to get too carried away. So you might want to do a little rear and a little front.
So I'm thinking, Trans Am cars, they still have solid rear axles, Trans Am cars?
I think so.
I think so.
I haven't done a Trans Am car in a long time, but yeah, I'm pretty sure they're still solid rear axles. And those TA2 cars are kind of like a short track stock car. So
yeah,
but that's easy. Those, I think those probably have actual coilovers on the rear.
Yeah.
So you can just wind the spring perch up also.
Right.
So it's something that, if you get to a situation where you're understeering, let's take Lime Rock again, Road Atlanta, where you're understeering in the right-hand corners and a little too free or too loose in the left-hand corners. Wow, then Crossweight's perfect.
Yeah.
Because you wind some in, it'll help the right-hand corners and help the left-hand corners. Or you get to a track where only the right-hand corners matter. The left-hand corner leads into another corner. Lime Rock's a good example. The left really leads into the right, which is much more important because it leads on to, what do they call it? No name straight.
Right.
It leads on to that straightaway there, which is more important than the left-hand corner for lap time.
Right.
And that's why, I've run some crazy, crazy oval track type setups at Lime Rock, and it works fantastic. Not just crossweight, but tilt and asymmetrical spring rates and all sorts of stuff. So it's a really good question. A lot of people miss that, I think. Fun to play with. Yeah.
And that I grew up around super modifieds and sprint cars on oval tracks, and it's so cool to see a sprint car come out of a corner with that left front tire 6 inches, 12 inches off the ground.
Right.
There's some weird stuff going on there. So, yeah.
It's and that's why you'll see, I think they still do it in the new Cup cars, NASCAR Cup cars, I think. Even though they're like an independent rear suspension now. But back in the older cars, a year ago, you'd always see them stick that wedge. They call it the wedge wrench. They'd stick it in the back window and put a couple rounds of wedge in it, Junior.
Yeah.
And that all they were doing was changing the cross weight. They were simply trying to get more weight or less weight depending on the handling of the car.
Yeah.
Simple as that. And it's a really good, effective tool. 30, again, if you were on scales and you weren't worried about percentage, I would say you need to start out in general with at least 25 pounds of front weight. So if your front tires weigh equal on your scales and you want to try it, make the tire you want to favor at least 25 pounds heavier than the other side. And that's probably enough to feel it. 50 pounds is probably a lot. But again, I'm of the thing, if you put 25 pounds in and it's better, try 50. If it's better, try 75. Keep going until it's not better.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. It's a great question because I like questions. I especially love the questions where I learn a bunch from you as well. So, which is pretty much every single question. So,
yeah, it works both ways.
Yeah,
works both ways. Well, okay, so let's now I get to learn. We have a question here from Daniel, and he brings up something that I wrote in my notes on this question. I said, "Oh, this is a great one for Ross, the braking guru," because I really think you are. So here's what he asked, what Daniel asked. He goes, "I have a question regarding high-speed sweepers. When you're coming off of a straight, does the brake trace profile change much with these types of corners? Should I still be braking hard and then off and off to try and settle the car? Or is it faster to brake earlier and much softer to keep the car settled throughout the entire section? I find the harder I brake, the less speed I can carry. But I'm not sure if it's because it's something I'm doing or if there's a balance to strike. See, most people ask about braking, like braking, right? Like, I'm going to outbrake a guy. This is a great one, I think, because braking in high speed kind of sweepers, you're still braking, but do you brush it? Do you, okay. Braking guru, have at it.
And the obvious answer is, it depends. Because that's the answer to everything,
like
right?
An engineer.
That
sounds like an engineer answer.
Yeah. Or I was also going to answer it going, yes.
Yes. Right.
Yeah.
Actually, no, I'm not going to let you do that.
Yeah. So, I mean, the most important thing that Daniel points out is the brake trace profile changing. And the answer is yes, it does change. And, I think if a driver can think about their braking in terms of, if you're following it on a data trace line where you're at 0 and the line's going along 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, and then you apply the brakes and the pressure goes up and the trace goes up, and then as you take your foot off, it comes back down again. Well, if a driver can think in those terms, that's really valuable, because there are times where I've been coaching a driver and I will just draw what I think the perfect brake trace profile should look like for this corner, and then tell the driver, go draw that with your foot. And that's when, that a driver, the improvement really happens quickly. If a driver can do that, that's really important. So, to Daniel's point here of that brake trace profile, yes, it does change. And so, and Jeff, I think you and I talked about this in a previous episode of your experience engineering for Dick Simon at the Indianapolis Motor Speedway for the 500. And me, during my rookie test days at the Speedway, me walking through Gasoline Alley, and Dick Simon, for whatever reason, comes up and talks to me and says, hey, when you're approaching turn 1, because as a rookie, and I don't care who you are, Alonso talked about how difficult it was to take turn 1 flat at the Speedway. And Dick Simon said, come down the front straightaway and at start-finish line, take your foot off the gas and coast, and then go back to full throttle and go through turn 1 at full throttle. And then with each lap, make that lift shorter and shorter and shorter until you're no longer lifting. And part of that was to help build confidence, and part of it was to help you get programmed to build a habit of keeping your foot flat. But most importantly, from a dynamics perspective, I think it was having the car balanced in that fast corner. And, so Daniel's talking about high-speed sweepers, a high-speed sweeper, turn 10 at Sonoma, the fast right-hander before the final hairpin corner. A corner like that, turn 1 at Sebring is a fast sweeper. Add in a bunch of bumps. You think of corners like that, and you in turn 1 at Mid-Ohio, where you want to have the car balanced. And to me, balanced is, the car not squatting down hard, but also not staying up on its nose. So to his point here of, should I still be braking hard when you get to the corner? I don't think so. To me, a fast sweeping corner, I would rather brake a little bit early and a little bit lighter than being at maximum braking, because I want the car to be flat, balanced, however you want to talk it or call it. I mean, you don't want the thing standing up on its nose. So, if you're coming to those kinds of fast sweeping corners, I'd rather see the trace kind of gradually go up and then gradually come back down again. So it's very smooth and gentle. It's not shocking the car, the tires, any of that kind of stuff. And therefore,
with that,
the car is better balanced.
Yeah, that makes sense. And how would that change if you were in you're coaching a lot in LMP2 cars? big high downforce, fast kind of car. Does that change at all? Either way, is it more or less important in a high downforce car or in a, like a street car at a track day, or does that not matter?
To me, it matters more if the car is an aero car, meaning it's generating. I mean, this is your area, right? I mean, it's generating downforce from the shape of the body and particularly the underside of the body. And
right.
The second you brake hard, the center of pressure of the aerodynamic downforce, right, is shifting, and therefore you've got a car. You're entering the corner with it in one place, and then as you release the brakes, it's shifting. And to you as a driver, you're going, "What have I got here? Like, is the car too sensitive on turn in? Is it now it's starting to understeer? Like, what is the car doing?" And it's because the aero center of pressure, right, and has changed. So I think with an aero car, perhaps, and I don't know if it's more important, but I could make the argument that it's more important. Whether it really is or not, I don't know, but I could make the argument that it is.
Well, so for me, I've had that before where I've wished the driver wasn't upsetting the car aerodynamically there, because I've had to run to make it comfortable for him. So the center of pressure and the aerodynamics isn't changing. I've had to run stiffer springs or stiffer sway bars or more bump rubbers or whatever, make the car stiffer so it doesn't move. And then in the slower corners, it's too stiff and we lose grip. So if the driver could do a better job with his brake trace, like you're describing, we could actually, as weird as it seems, it would help us go faster in the slow corners because I could run softer springs and make more grip. It's kind of
just recently I was at an event and a question triggered a memory of, I was coaching two highly paid professional drivers that were driving a GTLM car at Sebring, 7 years ago or so. And one driver was half a second a lap faster than the other one, which, as you know, with professional race drivers, if one driver is half a second slower, that's not a happy camper. And
I was going to say, did you put the ropes and knives and sharp objects away? Because one guy's about ready to do something bad.
Yes. And maybe not to the other driver, to himself,
right?
Half a second slow. Yeah. Because
exactly.
Because the job security is not a great thing in the life of a professional race driver. Because if you're half a second slower, you're out of a job pretty darn quick. So
pretty fast.
I'm looking at the data for both of them. And one of the things I notice immediately is one of the drivers is braking earlier and lighter, even into turn 7, the hairpin at Sebring, the tight, slow corner. And guess what? That was the fastest driver. So the whole thing of, you got to brake as late as you possibly can, as hard as you possibly can. In that case, in that GT car, what I understand about it is the aero coming off that car, the downforce that was generated from it was very, very sensitive to rake. So you braked hard, the center of pressure moved around a ton, and the driver was going in the corner. And as they're trailing off the brakes, coming into the corner, that was changing. And the driver that was braking later and harder, that was also half a second a lap faster, or slower, was confused by, what's the car telling me here? And because of that, they could lose half a second a lap. And Sebring's obviously a big track. There's a lot of corners. There's a lot of brake zones. But the one driver that was fastest was braking earlier and lighter. And particularly that showed up in turn 1. It showed because of the big, fast, sweeping corner. It did show up in turn 17, which is a pretty fast corner. But it also showed up, in this case, it also showed up in turn 7, the hairpin. So the slowest corner.
That's interesting. Yeah. That's interesting. I mean, I've always thought that the drivers that are really good are the guys that use the brake pedal as a platform management tool.
Yeah.
And so there might be times, tell me if I'm wrong on this, but there might be times where depending on the handling of the car, your brake trace shape and what you're doing with that pedal is different than it from, when the car was handling good. Let's say, I don't know, whatever, the fuel load changes and dramatically in your car. And now at the end of a fuel load, the car handles completely different. You might have to change your brake trace to help the balance of the car. So to me, I've seen where the brake application technique changes with the balance of the car. It's not fixed just because it's turn 7 at Sebring, you always brake like this. You might have to change that, right?
Yeah, and I would say that one of the things that separates the very, very best from the rest is the very, very best have 100 different ways to use the brakes. And to Daniel's question, they have 100 different brake trace shapes, right? Of how quickly they, do they, is it such a hard, almost a spike of the brake? Where the goes from zero boom to peak pressure immediately, or is there like a little bit of a ramp into that, or is it more of a almost like the way we brake on the street where we kind of gently feed in a squeeze on the brakes, so there's that side of the brake. Then there's the how long do you spend at the peak, and as in a high downforce aerodynamic car, the grip bleeds off quickly with the reduction in speed, right?
Right.
And so a driver hits the brakes and immediately has to start to bleed off the pressure. Otherwise, you're going to get a lockup because you're losing grip. But there's some of that even in a relatively non-aero car, like a production-based car. And so, the rate that you bleed off, like how long do you stay at the peak? How long, how quickly do you start to release that? And in that last little bit of the, I call it the tail of the trace. And is it a short tail? Is it a long tail?
Right.
And when a driver can start thinking about that, a driver can then have, like I said, 100 different ways to use the brakes, whereas a less than best driver might have 10 different ways or 3 different ways. I've looked at data traces from drivers who are relatively inexperienced, and the way they brake for, we'll use Sebring as an example. The way they brake for turn 1 is exactly the same way they brake for turn 3, which is the same way they brake that little brush of the brake in 5, the same way they brake the hard brake zone into the hairpin at 7, and in 10, and 13, and in 15, and that little dab at 16, and in 17. And the brake trace looks identical in all those places. Maybe the amount of pressure changes a little bit, but it looks the shape of it looks the same. I look at Colin's brake trace at Sebring, and there's a different profile in every single corner. Because he's adapting. And then to your point of, does that change with the way the car is handling? Like as the tires go off, has the front's gone off more than the rears? Well, you got to change the way you brake then as well. So all of those things. But, I guess to be direct to Daniel in terms of the high-speed sweeper, I would say as a general guideline, not a rule, as a
51%.
As a general guideline, fast sweeping corners, brake a little bit earlier, and if anything, a little bit lighter. And in fact, when you're trying to build up your speed in those fast corners, brake lighter, you brake a little earlier, almost pick a point that you're going to start braking, and then just gradually start reducing the pressure. So let's say you're using a 7 pedal, 7 out of 10, 10 being maximum threshold braking. So maybe you're using 7, go to 6 pedal, then to 5 pedal, then to 4 pedal. And then at 4 pedal, you find that, whoa, I'm carrying a lot of speed in the corner. Now I can't get it to change direction. Okay, now start to work around with a 5 pedal. And then as you're working with that 5 pedal, think about, okay, now can you move that whole, what would happen if you move the whole brake zone in? Now I'm entering the corner with a little bit of brake on. and that feels a little nervous on corner entry. Okay, move that back a little bit. Can you compress that brake zone rather than using a 5 pedal? Can you go to a 6 pedal but spend less time on the brakes? But right. as you found out, I mean, Daniel, I think mentions here something about the harder he brakes, the slower he enters the corners. Yeah, because if you compress too much, then you're entering the corner and you've got the car up on its nose, and you actually need to slow down that much because the car is unbalanced. So right. That's kind of the process I think you have to go through. But I would always, not always, but at least 51% or more percent of the time, I would start with braking a little earlier and a little lighter and working to be lighter to enter those fast sweeping corners with a car balanced, flat, however you want to describe that. And you feed in the throttle as you're going through the corner so that that's what the car likes. It doesn't like to be shocked in those fast corners, and it doesn't like great change. As you said, they're a platform manager. Think of that car as right. a platform, and the more you can manage it so that it's flat and balanced, the faster you're going to be through that fast corner. And here's a little. I'll go off on a little tangent here. In that, there's this old rule that I say in air quotes that right. the most important corner on the track is the one leading onto the longest straightaway. And there is a great argument for that, but you can flip that around and go, which corner is it that scares or intimidates drivers the most? It's usually the big, fast sweeping corners. And right. if you can get through those fast sweeping corners better than everybody else, I'll bet you're going to be faster than they are, even though they may, right. They may be great at getting out of that slow hairpin corner that leads onto the long straightaway. But that fast corner that intimidates you, you can make big chunks of time in.
Right, and I think also the thing is, a sweeping corner that leads on to any kind of straightaway.
Yeah,
it's the old and we've had this debate, but to me, as engineering, looking at the data and stuff, fast corners that lead on to long straightaways, I'd much rather be, if I have to be 3 miles an hour slow at the exit of a corner, I'd much rather be 3 miles an hour slow out of a slow corner than I would out of a fast corner.
Yeah.
So I like your idea, of the old, what you said about brake a little earlier and make sure that you're on the gas a little earlier is better than like stomping on the brake and slowing it down and then having to reaccelerate that car. Keep it rolling, especially because the aerodynamic forces are harder to overcome in a high-speed corner. So if you're 3 or 4 miles an hour slow, now you're pressing against all that air to try to gain that 3 or 4 miles an hour back.
In a taller gear versus a lower gear, yeah, all that stuff.
So, yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah. So I guess we went off on a little bit of a tangent, but yeah.
No, but we come back full circle, and you were right in the first thing. It depends.
It depends.
It depends. How's your car handling and all the other things? What kind of car do you have and everything else? But at least you've given people a good idea of maybe to fit that to their own personal situation. What kind of car, what kind of corner, what kind of handling they have, and all of that. So, yeah, I learned something.
And hopefully this will lead to another question that's like, well, what do I do with the brakes going into a tight hairpin corner, slow corner? But that's for another day.
Right. Outbrake the guy next to you and pass him. That's what I would say.
Yeah. Flat in fifth. Take that corner flat in fifth. You will be in the lead.
Right.
For some period of time.
Short period of time.
Yeah.
No, that was good.
Okay.
Good.
Well, I think we hammered out those two, and I guess we'll go on to another episode another day.
Yep. Yeah. All I can say is, try some crossweight and work on your high-speed braking corners, and if with all of that said, have fun.
Yeah, and if you got questions, send them to us. Thanks, everybody.
Right. Exactly. Thanks.
Thanks. Have fun.